My name's Greg Mayo. I'm the men's healing strategist here at Support After Abortion. We're going to talk about addressing absent father wounds. This is a very important topic. In a few minutes, we're going to get into some statistics on the impact an absent father actually has. And we're going to talk about the different types of absent father, because it's not just a physically absent dad, right? That's one of them for certain, the abandonment thing. But there's different kinds of absent fathers, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to share some stories. Niles, our newest male staff member at Support After Abortion, he's going to share some of his perspectives. And then we're going to talk about some steps you can take to heal that absent father wound. As we get into it, I want to start with a quote from John Eldredge, one of my favorite authors, in a book he wrote called Fathered by God. And I want you to think about this quote. This quote will inform a lot we're talking about. He wrote, "We often speak of a man who's done this," meaning life, "successfully as a self-made man. The appellation is usually spoken with a sense of admiration, but it should really be said in the same tones we might use of the dearly departed, or of a man who recently lost an arm, with sadness and regret. What the term really means is an orphan man who figured out how to master some part of his life on his own." Now, an orphan man has an absent father, and that's the whole tenor of that book was about reclaiming the missing father pieces of your life. And so when we think about that quote, and you think about a guy who says he's a self-made man, right? He's mastered a part of his life. Maybe he's has a very successful career or something else. But we know when you throw all of your energy into one aspect of your life, other parts falter, right? Other parts don't get the attention they need. There's no balance. This book, by the way, I read every January because it's a nice reminder to me that there's always work to do, both as a man who grew up with an absent father wound and as a father of children. So let's talk about some of those statistics that I mentioned, the impact of fatherlessness. First one's hard to see. 3 out of 4 teen suicides occur in a father absent household. Now, if you all remember, last month and the month before, we talked about the high percentage of suicides that are men and the number of men that kill themselves every day. And so here we find out that 75% of teens that commit suicide grew up without a dad. To me, that's startling and also very telling. Another statistic that shows the pain caused by an absent father: 85% of youths in prison grew up in a fatherless home. The stat is from lifefactors.org. I also want you all to understand that about 85% of adults in prison as well grew up in a fatherless home. Another stat: 80% of rapists come from a fatherless home and report displaced anger. Now, later in the year in Men's Healing Matters, we're going to dig a little deeper into anger and displaced anger, but we've talked a lot before about how men present anger, and behind that's fear, and behind that's a real thing, right? And what I'm learning more and more as I've studied and prepared to provide these sessions for everybody this year is that a lot of it, the anger and the fear, and it all comes back to the confusion of not knowing how to do life as a man because you didn't have a father around teaching you how to do life as a man. Another statistic that really speaks to our industry is that 71% of teen pregnancies happen to teens in a fatherless home. Now, that's teen boys and teen girls. I know boys can't get pregnant, but they're involved in the pregnancies. Again, there's no dad around to provide the direction that dads are supposed to provide. Now, this statistic really hit me a certain kind of way. A third of pregnancies in fatherless homes end in abortion. Now, let's think about that for a minute. Most of you, if you've talked to me before or been on one of these sessions before, my story. At 18, my girlfriend was pregnant and had an abortion. Here's the thing. When I read that stat, I thought about it and I really processed it quite a bit. And I realized that both of us were in fatherless homes. Now, her dad lived there. He was a different kind of fatherless, and we'll get to that later when we talk about the types of absent fathers. But for me, I was in a fatherless home. and wasn't really sure what to do. It didn't have the guidance, didn't have the confidence to know the path forward, and neither did she, and neither did her mom. And so the result was an abortion. But also want you to think about the statistic when you think about the men and the women, frankly, that come into your centers, if you work at a center or into your facility. And when we talk about how to help and identify men that have father wounds and so forth and so on, this is something we need to be aware of, the statistics. So let's talk about what an absent father is. The first one's obvious, right? He's absent. In our book, Unraveled Roots for Men, we devoted an entire chapter to abandonment. It, this is truly an absent dad, right? He just isn't there. My parents divorced when I was 6, and my dad lived a few towns away, which at that age seemed like 100 miles, but I saw him every couple months. There was no intentionality, right? My dad was absent. And that's one version of an absent father. There are daily opportunities and lessons that a boy and a girl too, I'm sure, need to be able to get from their father. The only way you get those opportunities is by being there. My dad, and I'll talk more about how we both healed later, but he told me when I started hunting again as an adult that the key to being successful in hunting was luck and time in the woods. What I learned as a father, and now that all my 4 sons are adult men, is that the key to being a father is luck and time in the woods. You have to be there, right? And so we talk about the truly absent father. That's the first thing that comes up. The second one is the abusive dad. Now, we obviously think of physically abusive when we hear the word abusive, but there are other kinds of abuse. There's verbal abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, right? So those are all encompassed in the abusive dad, and that's our second type. The third type is the demanding or hypocritical dad. I want to share a story about that from a friend of mine in junior high. We had plans to go down to the park and play basketball one afternoon. So I rode my bike over, and I found out he was grounded. He wasn't able to go. And I asked him why he got grounded. And he got grounded because he was told to do the dishes, which he did, cleaned up the entire kitchen. And then he had a bowl of cereal. And so when his dad came home from work, there was a bowl and a spoon in the sink. That's and he got grounded for it. That's demanding. The dad that demands perfection, right? The dad that after his son's baseball game is mad because he went 3 for 5 at the plate instead of 4 for 5. And the dad who we talk about hypocritical, it's the I'm never good enough. I never do enough. I've never achieved enough. I got an A on my test. Why didn't you get an A plus? I got 100%. Why didn't you get the extra 3% for the bonus question? It's that kind of father. And these other types, by the way, other than just the physically absent, it's absent in the sense of not providing the whole that a father's supposed to. Is the shortest way I can put that. Number 4, the Disneyland or passive dad. By the way, this list came from All Pro Dads, an article on their website. And I thought that was a fascinating way to put it, the Disneyland dad or the passive dad. So who is that guy? That's a guy that wants to be your best friend, not your father, right? Now, I joked around with my kids. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you walk around like an authoritarian automatron, but when your interest is more being your son's buddy than being his father and leader, we have a problem. The passive dad that kind of lets stuff go and lets kids do whatever just because they don't want to be the bad guy. Those are the same thing, right? And a lot of times they overlap. And a lot of these overlap with each other. I get that. But that's definitely an absent father. Why? Because the kid's not getting the instruction, the guidance, and the leadership that he deserves, needs, and wants. He's got a best friend who's 35 years old with a beard. And then number 5, the macho dad. We know this guy, right? He may brag about never hitting his kids. I've never beat my kids, but his kids are scared to death of him because he's a big macho tough guy. What else to say? I know such a guy, a young man I used to work with, and his kids were great kids, and he would tell everybody, "My kids are great kids," and they were. His kids were terrific, on the surface. But see, he was a macho dad. He scared his kids with modern social media would call it alpha male authority, right? That's not how you lead a family. So his kids were good, they were in line, but they weren't good and in line because they understood life and consequences and the balance of things and all that. They were in line and good because they're scared to death. That generational trauma will manifest in them in some other way down the road. And then there's the distracted dad. This is the dad who is so focused on work, or maybe it's his sports, his events, his activities, it's whatever. But maybe it's bills. Maybe he's distracted by his own anxiety, his own depression, his own unhealed wounds. Whatever it is, he is so distracted and wrapped up in whatever else is going on that he's not there for his children in an intentional way. Now, looking at these, like I said, there's overlap, right? And nobody's just one or the other. But when I was putting this list together, and I was thinking about my own childhood and my own fathering. I failed in many ways as a dad, even though my kids are growing, I still do. But I knew I was going to be present. And I thought this was important to share. See, my kids got to the age where I had an opportunity to work for myself as a building contractor and be home more. And I did that in the middle of the housing market crash and the recession and all that. Great time to start a business, by the way. But I did that intentionally, and I turned down what at the time were a couple of jobs that would have been life-changing money. But it was more important for me to be home with my kids. And so I was. And luck and time in the woods, I had the moments, right, to be there for them, to be able to coach baseball and soccer and basketball. And that was intentional. But I also was the passive dad for a while, So I guess I share that to say we're looking at our fathers when we look at this list, and when we think about ourselves when we think about this list, we've got to be honest about what we did well and what we didn't, and what we can still improve on. This is the healing journey, this constant pursuit of growth and betterment for ourselves, and that's why I share that. You may think, if there's all these kinds of absent father wounds, why don't men get the help they need? And we've talked about that time and again at this point, right? For years, we've been talking about this. I found a quote in a book called Iron John, written by Robert Bly. I first read this book back in the early 90s, and it's what got me started on thinking about men's issues. But the quote says, men are taught over and over when they're boys that a wound that hurts is shameful. That physical or emotional, right, guys? A wound that hurts is shameful. A wound that stops you from continuing to play is a girlish wound. How many men on this call, when they were young, got wounded playing some game and were made fun of? Or you saw somebody else get wounded and get made fun of, and you're like, I'm not going to act like anything's wrong. The basketball course I used to run in high school and into my college years, there was a rule: no autopsy, no foul. If you go to the ground and you come up and your lips bleeding, you keep playing. You're not going to be the one to say foul. That's what he's talking about. In this last section, this last part of this quote from Bly, I thought was so telling. He says, he who is truly a man keeps walking, dragging his guts behind him. Now, how many guys on here does that resonate with? Now, the imagery of that. Yeah, my guts just got ripped out in a sword fight or whatever, but I'm going to drag him on the dirt and keep moving forward. Why? Because I'm a man and that's what men do. And that's part of the problem. This quote from Robert Bly sums up part of the problem of why men don't get the help they need. How many men don't understand that it's okay to cry? It's okay to be sad. It's okay to feel lost and confused and like you don't understand. And it's okay to share that with another human being. And we have to change that narrative. A big reason men don't get the help they need is because they've been told not to. But let's say a guy comes in or a guy you're working with, and he's not going to, likely not going to just offer up his feelings. We just talked about that in the Bly quote. So how do we recognize absent father wounds in men? Well, one of the first things is, and I related to this, they instinctively distrust other men. When I was a young man, I had an innate distrust for older guys. They didn't trust them, didn't believe them, thought there was an agenda. There's also a victim mindset, and they project responsibility on somebody else, right? It's somebody else's fault. I heard a young man, him and his girlfriend were involved in an unintended pregnancy. And he said to me, I just don't understand why she did this. And I was, that's a projecting responsibility, right? And I said, I don't know if you're aware how this works, but you both did this. So it's that kind of mindset. It's somebody else's fault, right? And the other thing is the unexplained emotional touchiness or quick temper. Y'all, before I entered into healing, I had that and I didn't understand it. I never saw myself as an angry person, but at some point I became aware that I'd grown into someone who would snap like that. Why? It's that absent father wound, y'all. And now we're going to talk about breaking the cycle. We're going to talk about over masculinity. And to do that, Niles is going to jump on here because he has some thoughts to share about that. Niles, where are you at, boss?
I'm here, right here for you, Greg. I just wanted to speak up on breaking the cycle and then discussing don't let over masculinity hold you back. Because as Greg spoke before about why men don't get the help they need, it comes from men getting this thing. We don't talk about our feelings. We don't talk about our thoughts because at the end of the day, we're supposed to shut up, do what we're supposed to do, and just put your head down and, like they say, drag our guts behind. So dragging our guts doesn't have to just follow with just physical wounds, but also our emotional and mental burdens and struggles that we deal with as well. So I feel like me growing up, being an athlete, as probably many other men in this chat and women, is we just fight through everything and you just have to keep carrying on. You hear from your coaches, no matter if you have a bad day, you have to separate what happens off the field or on the court or whatever. So I feel like when we discuss over masculinity for a lot of men these days, when they're dealing with their abortion experience and these wounds from their emotional and mental struggles, I feel like we tend to, myself personally, when I dealt with mine, I held mine in. I was going to class, I was talking to coaches. I had friends always asking if everything's okay with me, put a smile on my face and walk through it. But at home, when I got home, I felt alone. I felt like I had nobody to talk to, and I really felt like there was nowhere for me to really express myself. Until I don't tell a lot of people, I actually broke down in the middle of football practice, cried in front of all my teammates, coaches, and told everybody I quit. I was about to give up my dream of playing college football because I couldn't handle the burdens of my abortion experience. And that's when I realized that I had to break the cycle of over masculinity. And I just want to encourage everyone as a man just to speak up. Like, we shouldn't hold back our feelings because we're trying to carry this facade of I'm overly strong, I'm Superman. Because at the end of the day, we are regular people. We have emotions and feelings, and we should be able to express those clearly and be able to relate to others.
So thanks for sharing that, Niles. I got to ask you a question. You're with your football team, one of the most tough guy sports out there, right? And you broke down and you said you broke down and were crying in front of the team. How did your teammates receive that?
So me being the guy I was always known as the guy as I'm always composed, I'm very calm. I'm always laughing, joking, and smiling. My teammates actually, they were surprised because I wouldn't say I didn't show emotion other than football. You play sports, you show your competitive edge. But when it came to that, a lot of teammates haven't seen that side of me, even coaches, because everybody knew that it had to be something serious and something that was going on internally for me to actually express that much emotion. Because honestly, in that moment, I didn't care who saw me because it was one of the points I had a lot going on that my abortion experience was lingering on me and holding me back. And I was having a rough day at practice, and my coach even asked me, like a lot of people, when you feel that emotion and you'll be fine all day, you may be upset, but if that one person asks you, "Are you okay?" or "What's wrong?" it all just poured out. I didn't know how to contain it. It came out of nowhere. I was fine and just poured out. My teammates viewed it as some I felt like a weakness, but a lot of them felt me strong because they were like, they never seen it like on the football field just cry and show their emotion of what's going on. A lot of my teammates even checked on me. They're always asking if I'm all right. And it opened up for us as a team to actually have a mental health therapist come in and talk to us as players. And because our coach realized that it was something that, like I said before, he wanted to break the cycle of over masculinity. He wanted us to be able to express ourselves and lean on our brothers and teammates.
To me, that's beautiful. And that's an example of how you lead, how one leads by their example. You feel like you're alone and you so you're gonna, like you said, put on the smiley face and joke around and whatever, and keep all that stuff buried, that pain and confusion and anxiety, because you feel like you're either gonna get mocked, made fun of, that's not who you're supposed to be, but then you let it out. and you find out that no, other guys, they do care. They are compassionate. They do want to help you, even your coach, right? Am I on the right track here with this?
Of course, because it was one of those things we all get wrapped up with daily life, especially as athletes. We think as student athletes, we're school, football, talk to your family. Maybe you have a girlfriend, then we're doing assignments, exams, and we let our internal and personal self, even as men, just in regular life, because sometimes you try to get so wrapped up in your work life, as you said, as an absent father. Some absent fathers, they become the distracted dad. Even if you're not a dad at the time, we still as men, we do try to put ourselves and energy into something else to suppress those emotions because if they feel like the more I work, the less I think, the less I feel. And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's something that even as you may see that as your father, there's wounds he may not have healed from. And that's what's breaking the cycle. You don't want to put that onto your next child, even after your abortion experience, because you hold on to those feelings. It could lead to you repeating the cycle. Then it ends up, it's just a family thing. You want to start set the standard for your family better than you left it. And that's the way I think of it. And that's how I try to treat every day of my life.
I love that. And part of the reason that Support After Abortion started using me as a volunteer, what I don't know, 3 years ago or whatever it was a man's perspective. And we talk about that a lot on here, and we talk about that a lot in general. Men think differently and they do this differently and do that. But what I'm learning is that men need to be given permission, just like Niles, what you shared. Men need to be given permission to, yeah, hey, you know what? If you're feeling something, say something. Find a trusted friend. I've got a very small circle of men that I could say anything to. There's three of them. And when we were on a fishing trip a few weeks ago up in Lake Michigan, we got off the boat and we were on the beach just shooting the breeze and whatever. And we started talking about real stuff. Now we're in our 50s, but here's these four men. We've known each other forever. And we started talking about it was actually started by my cousin who said, hey, just want to ask you guys if I go first, I want you guys to be my pallbearers. And here's what I'd like you to do at my funeral. And so we had this deep conversation about how we feel and fears about the age we are and how much pavement's ahead of us on the road. And it was this most beautiful, touching, honest conversation. But what I'm learning as I look around and I connect with these different groups on social media. And yes, social media or sending reels to your wife over coffee in the morning is a fun way to spend your day. But there's also other groups on there. And I've connected with these men's mental health groups. And what I realized is, although my circle is small, some men don't have a circle at all. You look in the comments and they respond to these posts, dozens and dozens of men who literally have not one single person they can talk to. You talk about Niles, you had your team, and that started a snowball with mental health awareness within the team and the organization and all that. And I think about that, and I think how great that is. And I think about all the men who don't have even a small group to talk to and don't have a pop that they can go talk to. Now, I know it's probably a little strange for you guys to see I'm getting ready to talk about the 4x4 questioning method again, but I'm gonna because it's effective. And yes, those are actual 4x4s, but although they've been plain, so they're nominal 4x4. Anyway, the 4x4 question method, we talk about it all the time. Why? Because it works. You got a guy coming in your center. We've looked at stats, we've looked at different kinds of absent dads. We've talked about the idea that there's a strong likelihood that this guy has an absent father wound. But we've also talked about is he's probably not going to tell you that. But knowing that there's a high probability should inform the idea that okay, I need to start asking questions if I'm going to get this out of it. And so for those of you who haven't been with me on one of these before, the 4x4 question method I actually learned in sales training years ago. And it's simply four questions wide, four deep. You ask a question and his answer leads to the next question. People talk about they want a framework, like a map. What do I do? Tell me every step. And it occurred to me this morning when I was out taking my walk, the 4x4 question method is not a map. Rather, it's instructions on how to read a map. And then you figure out the path. And it's going to be different with every guy. And so to do that, like we said before, you have to be curious. You have to be non judgmental. and curious and truly listen. And he'll tell you what you need to know. He'll tell you where his father wound is. He'll tell you what his fears are. And that is how you better serve him. So, yeah, the 4x4 question method, I'll never get tired of it. It's one of the most effective things I've ever seen in my life. And when I started stepping into the mental health world 8 or 10 years ago, I carried the sales tool with me and it works. So it's a terrific thing. It's just like when I started coaching soccer, I took basketball drills with me. It's the same thing, just bigger field. So the next thing I want to talk about is, how does healing begin? And that's a question we get a lot too. And I found this quote that it was attributed to Anonymous. But I tell you what, if you look on the internet or even look in boardrooms at the posters up on the wall, I don't know who this Anonymous guy is, but he says a lot of cool stuff. Anyway, the quote says, an absent father can make a child feel like they're wandering through a maze without an exit. But the beauty of life is that there is always a way out. You just have to keep moving forward, even when the path is unclear. I love that quote. Why? Because it's so simple and so true. How does healing begin? With one step. Where? I don't know. That way, right? Healing begins with taking a step. When I got in touch with my need for abortion healing, the first thing I did was order a book. And the first book I read wasn't a good one, but I took a step. I met with my pastor. I met with a counselor. You guys heard this stuff before. The point is, you start. Every journey begins with a single step, right? That's how healing begins. You start. You have to make the decision that, hey, you know what? I need healing, and I'm going to go find out what it looks like and how to do it. And from hardenedlife.com, we've actually got some steps here that they talk about. The first thing is to acknowledge and uncover the wound. That seems pretty simple, right? But if you look at different recovery and healing sources and entities around the world, what you'll find is, for most of them, that's the first step. Just acknowledge it and uncover it. What is the wound? I have a father wound. Okay. For me, when I got in touch with that, when I moved back from Nebraska, I was just almost 23. And I started seeing a therapist. And that therapist encouraged me to write a letter to my dad about all the things I was feeling, right? We didn't call it an absent father wound, but that's what I was writing about. And I did. And I gave this letter to my dad. And I have to preface by saying, at that point, my dad had been sober for 16 years, and he had a lot of recovery and a lot of healing of his own. Okay. So I handed him the letter at my house, and he sat down on the couch and he read it, sitting right there on my couch. He folded it up, he put it in his pocket, and he was tearing up a little bit. Now that's significant because I only saw my dad cry 3 times in my entire life, and that was one of them. He said, "Thank you for sharing that. When you want my response, I'll give it to you." And I said, "Okay." And he left. About 2 or 3 weeks later, I drove out to his place. He lived just outside the town I live in. And I walked up to the barn and poured a cup of coffee. Yes, my dad had a coffee pot in his barn. And I sat down and I said, "All right, Pop, I'm ready to hear your response." And that 2 or 3 hours sitting there in the barn was one of the most healing experiences of my entire life. I took the step, I acknowledged the wound, I took it to my father. And because of that, from that day up until he died just over 2 years ago now, we had one of the closest relationships you could ever hope with. Was there still a wound there? No, it healed. There's still a scar. It still had a ripple effect. But the point is, we found healing. I found healing. And that was the first step. The second step is validate your feelings. I know to a lot of guys on here that feels icky. Validate your feelings. I know I kind of wince at the phrasing sometimes myself, but it's true. And dare I say, valid. Validate your feelings. I feel sad. I feel like I missed something. I feel hurt. I feel wounded, abandoned, left out, whatever you're feeling, acknowledge it and then validate it, because it's a valuable feeling. It's a true feeling, and it informs some part of your life, your psyche, mentally, emotionally, whatever. The next thing is imagine a good father. This idea May seem a little whimsical to some people, but I'm telling you, there's an incredible benefit to it. And it's not the power of positive thinking or anything like that. It's simply imagining what a good dad would have looked like. When I started having kids, the only thing I knew is I didn't want to leave like my dad and I didn't want to be abusive like my stepdad. Now, part of that's playing life on defense, but when I had to make a decision, I made it based on what I would like my dad to have done had he been around. Imagining a good father is a very valuable exercise. And sometimes we find that some things we thought were really bad about our dad really weren't. They were actually good in our father that we had, even imperfect as they may be, right? The other thing is grieve the loss. There is simply no form of healing or recovery that does not require us to grieve the loss. I don't like dealing with grief, but I do. I don't like eating broccoli, but I eat it because it's good for me. And don't tell me you like broccoli. Nobody does. There's a movie that I got to share this with you that we just watched a few weeks ago with some friends. They put it in. It's called Inside Out. It's a cartoon, basically. And it's about this little kid from like birth till, I don't know, maybe 12 or something, and the little emotions that go on in their head, right? And we were watching this, and for the first half of it, the one that represented sadness drove me nuts. And I was vocal about it. I had this real visceral reaction to this character, right? But then as you go on through the flick, what you find out is that those emotions have value. They have a place. They exist for a reason, right? It can't always be joy. And so I began to see the value in that. And it's the same with grieving. Nobody wants to grieve. Nobody wants to feel that pain. But you learn, and if you don't know it in here yet, then accept the knowledge and do something with it. You'll learn that if you walk through the grief, then you find a different level of healing. And if you don't walk through the grief, you exclude yourself from that level of healing because grief will always hold you back. I had to grieve the loss of my father. My father's been gone, like I said, over 2 years now. I still miss him. But had I not given myself time to grieve it, I'd be feeling it a lot different way. Now, if you're of a faith tradition, then another step would be to take the wound to our Heavenly Father, give it to God. In that book, Fathered by God, that I talked about earlier by John Eldredge, that's the whole point of the book. Whatever you missed from your father, God will provide. Then I'll leave that there. And the other thing is forgive your father. That was a big step for me. I forgave my dad. We could not have had a relationship that we did otherwise. My kids wouldn't have had the relationship they did with him had I not forgiven him. And I know that because my dad truly never forgave his father while he was alive. And my grandfather died when I was 9. And so I had almost no relationship with him. I saw him a few times. I remember him, but very little. And dad told me he always regretted not reconciling with his dad before he passed. So forgive your pop in whatever way you can. Remember, too, that forgiveness is not an emotion, it's a decision. And sometimes one that has to be made regularly. Y'all, I forgave my stepfather. Unfortunately, I didn't get to that place in my journey until after he had passed. I forgave him. And when I forgave him, I was able to see past the bad that I experienced and remember the good too. It's a balance, right? So let's review what we've talked about here today. We talked about the idea of a self made man, right? This cat mastered some part of his life. Terrific. He did that for a myriad reasons, but he's really not self made. He's an orphan who tried to muddle through and succeed at one thing. He's fatherless. We talked about the impact of fatherlessness in the statistics. I encourage you all to think about those statistics. They're very real and they're very telling. And we talked about a third of the pregnancies in fatherless homes in an abortion. I shared a little bit about how that worked out for me. Talked about what an absent father is and the different types of absent father, right? It's not just one thing. We also talked about why men don't get help that they obviously need. And we shared a quote about that, which was cool, that Niles then touched on too, the idea of I'm going to drag my guts behind me and keep on trucking, right? We talked about ways to recognize absent father wounds in men. We talked about the 4x4 question method. Again, ask a question, let it lead to the next question. We go 4 deep on each one. We talked about how healing begins, and then we talked about steps that you can take to begin healing a father wound. It is a process, gang. And it'll be a process with the guys that come into your center. But I think that with the awareness of what a father wound is, how it impacts guys and families, and how to help heal it and how to recognize it, I think that when guys come in, and I hear from so many staffers and volunteers at pregnancy centers and different places, man, a guy, I get him once and then I never hear from him again. And maybe, just maybe, if we start unpacking these things in a deliberate way and not just maybe focusing on one thing, but really open it up and ask the questions and be a good listener and remaining curious, maybe we get to see them more. Maybe we're helping them with whatever their immediate thing is right now. And it may look different than what we think it should be. 4x4. Let's talk about that a little bit more. There seems to always be a lot of questions with that. So it's the idea that you go 4 questions wide and 4 questions deep. So each question you go down 4. So a guy comes in and he's wearing a Notre Dame t-shirt. Now, and this has nothing to do with healing, but I'm just saying, I could ask him, hey, you an Irish fan? You follow football? Okay. Then you can ask those questions and you can find out what team he likes and what sport he likes and all that kind of stuff. How do we take that and work it into healing? If a guy's sitting across from you and him and his significant other have come in a pregnancy situation and she goes off to do what they do and he sits down with you. Now you got just a few minutes to talk to him. What do you say? How you doing? Want a cup of coffee? Yes, it's okay to start off with how you doing. Want a cup of coffee? No, I'm all right. You seem a little like a little anxious. Are you comfortable? Yeah, I'm fine. What do you think about all this? About what? Sheila, that's her name, right? She's in there with Betty and Susie. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it wasn't what I was expecting, that's for sure. Oh, yeah? What were you expecting? Not her to get pregnant. Oh, how long you guys known each other? We've known each other 6 months. Have you guys talked about what forward looks like now that she is pregnant? No, not really. I've told her that whatever she wants to do, it's her decision, right? Woman's decision. Yeah. Okay. Is that how you feel? Is that what you really think, or you just thought you were supposed to say that? Oh, well, I don't know. I'm the man, right? You're the man, and you're half of what happened. She's the woman. So what do you want to do? I I had a really crappy dad. Oh, do you want to talk about that at all? No, I don't know. I don't know anything about being a father. Okay, see what I just did there in what, 2 minutes? Let the next question lead to the next question. And already we got to the point. Now, granted, both characters are me, right? But it doesn't take long to get to the point to find out what he really thinks about the pregnancy, if he's scared, and that he doesn't really have a high regard for his own father. Therefore, he's afraid he won't be a good father. And that took me about 2 minutes. And that's fairly typical if you're listening to what the guy says and let that answer inform the next question, walking down a path. If he now imagine, let's do a sort of the antithesis of that, right? Let's say he walked in and sat down, same scenario, but this time I said, so she's in there pregnant and you're here, and I don't know, you look scared and a little off base. Are you guys thinking about abortion? Are you thinking about that because you had a crappy childhood? What's going on? See what I mean? That would be really bad and not very effective. So that's something to be mindful of as far as the 4x4 method. Niles?
You have spoken before that men don't sit in a group to go through healing. What is a setting and format to facilitate male healing?
That's a great question. A lot of men don't. Some do. Some will sit in a group. There's a couple things here. First of all, virtual. Now that seems like odd, right? You're still sitting in a group. And when the idea first came up to facilitate a virtual healing group for men, honestly, I was dead set against it. I'm like, this is stupid. It's not going to work. Guys aren't going to sit like the Brady Bunch on a computer screen, right? But I was surprised, as I often am, about how wrong my assumptions are. And what I learned was that guys actually opened up more and more quickly in a virtual setting than they did in person. Why? You take where I'm sitting right now. I am sitting in my home office. I'm in my house. I am staring at my stuff, my books, my guitars are hanging behind me. I'm comfortable because I'm in my own space. The other thing is, a lot of people want anonymity. They're not going to walk in the door of your church. They're not going to walk in the door of your PRC in the strip mall when they come out of Ace Hardware and go to a meeting. It's just not going to happen. The other thing is, I'm really starting to hear a lot of buzz about experiential healing opportunities for men. Not the standard retreat format, but I heard this at a men's conference last fall in Georgia, and I hate this term, but I don't know any other term to use. So they're called adventure retreats. That doesn't mean extreme mountain biking and cliff diving, and that's not what it is. It's where you go out in the woods and you're doing something intentional. Whether it's a hike, and there's a certain, any of you that hike like I do, you know that there's certain spots along the trail that you're just going to stop because something strikes you, right? It's the beauty of the surroundings, the waterfall, whatever it is. So it's planned, and you stop there, and that's where you have a lesson or whatever, and maybe you're kayaking or shooting bow and arrows or whatever. So that is a growing idea, and there's a lot of buzz in abortion healing and other men's ministry areas about this kind of event. Why? I think it hasn't caught on up until this point because, frankly, there's a lot involved in planning something like that. But the value for men to be able to up doing something and engage, right? We talked about women bond face to face, men shoulder to shoulder. That's the opportunities that we're looking for, and where you take the experience on different levels with different senses. I appreciate y'all being here. The recap will be available on our website as well as the video. Men's Healing Matters. My name's Greg Mayo, Support After Abortion. I want to thank Niles for coming on and talking. If you have questions or comments, reach out to one of us. We'd be happy to help you. As always, thank you. Have a terrific day.